This video was brought to you by Brilliant. On Friday, Iran announced that it was forming a joint navy with Saudi Arabia and a bunch of other regional players. While it doesn't quite seem like a done deal yet, it's another sign that Saudi-Iran relations are on the up, and that many Middle Eastern countries have apparently had enough of the US's presence in the region. So in this video, we're going to take a look at this proposed alliance, whether it could actually happen, and why, if it does, it would have enormous geopolitical consequences. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's get straight into it. On Friday night, in an interview with Iranian state media, Iran's Navy commander announced that the country was planning to form a naval alliance with Saudi Arabia and a host of other Middle Eastern states, including the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Qatar. Now, these states are sometimes referred to as the Gulf states because they all have coasts along the Persian Gulf, which is one of the world's major oil export routes. On top of this announcement, in a thinly veiled dig at the US, who are currently the main naval power in the region, Irani promised that the new alliance would rid the region of any, quote, illegitimate force, and even suggested that it could eventually be extended to include not just the 4 Gulf states, but even Iraq, India, and Pakistan. Now, this idea was presumably dreamed up at the BRICS summit last week, which included senior officials from Iran, Saudi Arabia, and India. On top of that, the announcement came just 2 days after the UAE said that it had withdrawn from the Combined Maritime Forces, or CMF, a US-led naval coalition of 38 nations tasked with securing the Gulf transit routes that are vital to global oil trade. Unsurprisingly, this announcement was met with derision in the United States. A US Navy spokesperson told military-focused news outlet Breaking Defense that the new naval alliance, quote, defies reason, given that Iran is the main source of instability within the region. For context, Iran does have a habit of seizing passing oil tankers, usually in response to seizures of Iranian oil tankers by the US Navy that it suspects might be circumventing US sanctions. The US Navy spokesperson also pointed out that America and the Gulf Cooperation Council, which includes Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain, had published a joint statement only a couple of months ago condemning Iran's continued destabilizing policies in the region. And just last week, the US and UAE navies carried out joint patrols in the Gulf of Oman. So the question is this actually going to happen? Or does it, in the words of the US, defy reason? Well, in its extended format, which would apparently include not just the Gulf states, but also Pakistan and India, almost definitely not. Mainly because it's hard to imagine India and Pakistan in any kind of military alliance. However, the idea of a joint Gulf Navy isn't unfathomable. While there are tensions between the Gulf states, Iran-Saudi relations are on the up at the moment, and both Saudi and the UAE are less friendly with the US than they used to be. While this Gulf Navy wouldn't have anywhere near as much firepower as the US, let alone the 38-state CMF, if the other Gulf states could find an agreement with Iran, then they wouldn't really need it. Because, well, the CMF only needs as much firepower as it has to deter Iran from seizing tankers. If Iran was on side then the Gulf Navy would only really need to protect against pirates, so it would never need CMF levels of firepower. In a way, this would all also make sense for the US, which is currently trying to withdraw from the Middle East as part of its pivot to Asia. Now, that's not to say that there aren't obstacles to this idea. It would require Saudi Arabia and Iran to really trust each other, which feels like a bit of a long shot for 2 countries which have been regional rivals for the past 40 years or so, and who only resumed diplomatic relations earlier this year. It's also worth mentioning that while they haven't denied it, none of the relevant countries, apart from Iran, have actually confirmed their participation in this joint navy yet, which suggests that it's more of an aspiration than a fully fleshed out policy. Nonetheless, while it might not happen immediately, the resumption of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Iran means that a Gulf Navy is at least a possibility in the future. It would be of massive geopolitical significance for two major reasons. Firstly, it would be proof that Iran-Saudi relations really are warming up. Saudi Arabia and Iran's geopolitical rivalry has been a key dynamic in the Middle East since the Iranian Revolution in 1979. Now, this tension has played out in multiple ways and in multiple locations, most notably in Yemen, which is often described as a proxy war, with Saudi Arabia leading the coalition in support of the Yemeni government against the Houthi rebel movement, which is backed by Iran. This dispute was so severe that the two countries broke formal diplomatic ties in 2016 after Iranian protesters sacked the Saudi embassy in Tehran in response to Saudi Arabia's execution of a prominent Shia Muslim leader. But things have been changing, and in April, a Chinese brokered deal saw Iran and Saudi Arabia agree to restore ties, after which the two countries' foreign ministers held official talks for the first time since 2016. Now, this is all part of Iran's wider rapprochement with its Middle Eastern neighbors. The UAE and Iran also resumed formal relations just last year, and that was only made possible by the fact that since Mohammed bin Salman and Joe Biden came to power, US-Saudi relations have been rapidly deteriorating. So if Iran and Saudi have really sorted out their differences, that will be massive news for the Middle East. Not only because it could mean an end of the war in Yemen, but also because it could finally pave the way to stability in the Middle East. But that's not the only reason this matters. The second reason that this would be massive news geopolitically is because it would put an end to the US Navy's presence in the Middle East, where it's acted as a guarantor for the oil trade since basically the end of World War II. Now, this made sense when the US was importing lots of oil from the Middle East, because it was in America's self-interest to make sure that oil could be shipped out of the Persian Gulf. But it makes a bit less sense today, because thanks to the rise of fracking, the US no longer imports much oil at all. The world's big oil importer today is China, which means that the US Navy is currently guaranteeing oil exports for China. And that's actually why Trump suggested withdrawing in 2019, something the US didn't do in the end, presumably because, well, they didn't like the idea of China controlling the world's oil trade, and because the current arrangement allows the US to cut oil off from China in the event of a conflict. Now, this is something that the Chinese are worried about, and they even have a name for it, the Malacca Dilemma. Now, if this Gulf Navy were to replace the US, then it would significantly reduce America's leverage and solve this dilemma for China. So if this idea actually does come to pass, it will have massive implications, potentially ending wars, solving China's major Malacca dilemma, saving the US Navy a bunch of time and money, but also reducing America's leverage. When making videos like this, we rely on a ton of data analysis to interpret crucial economic data and understand political decisions. And that kind of analysis isn't just crucial for our jobs. As the world becomes more driven by AI and data, your job will likely require more analytical skills too. Fortunately though, you don't have to be left behind if you jump onto Brilliant. Brilliant.org is the STEM learning platform which can teach you all the skills you need for an increasingly digital workplace. From foundational and advanced maths to AI, data science, neural networks, and more. That means that the progression of tech and AI doesn't need to be intimidating. With easy to understand and interactive programs, you can level up your skills by spending just a few minutes a day on Brilliant. And you'll want to. Their programs have been directly built around the principles of active learning. So they're fun, interactive, and help you learn by doing. Plus, with new courses added all the time, there's no way that you're going to get left behind. To try everything that Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, click the link in the description. Plus, the first 200 of you to sign up will get 20% off Brilliant's annual premium subscription. As always, thanks to Brilliant, and thank you to you for your support.